thank you all for coming this evening. I know it's actually turning out to be a pretty nice night, compared to all the rain that was supposed to happen. So thank you for coming here. I'm Dr. Ted Suzelis, and I'm a naturopathic doctor. Sure, many of you have not heard of naturopathic doctors before, have very little knowledge. Basically, we're specialized doctors of natural medicine. So what that means is I'm not a medical doctor, I'm not an osteopathic doctor or a chiropractor, but as a naturopathic doctor, I did attend a 4-year naturopathic medical school after doing a 4-year bachelor's degree in biology and chemistry. And so at our naturopathic medical schools, we do very similar training, especially in the first 2 years, to a regular medical doctor, learning all the medical sciences. But then, especially in our second 2 years of medical school, we go a lot more into learning about natural medicine therapies so that we can help patients without drugs. Currently, we're licensed in 18 states. Unfortunately, Ohio and Pennsylvania aren't quite there yet, and that's part of why we're not as common. Although, with us not being licensed in the state, it doesn't allow me to do some things that if I were in one of the licensed states, like I can't be somebody's primary care doctor, but I can still help people and be a specialist in natural medicine for people. It just means you have to use the conventional medical system too. One of the biggest downfalls, I would say, about us not being recognized by the state is that anybody can then call themselves a naturopathic doctor because there's no restrictions on it, because it's not even in the law. So that means that most people in Ohio that call themselves naturopathic doctors, maybe they went to do a couple-week course over the internet, or maybe up to 6 months, but still they didn't go to a 4-year medical school, do all the conventional training, and then all the natural medicine training in that area to really learn what it is to do naturopathic medicine, to understand the body and how it works. So with that, I want to start this seminar, and we're going to talk about chronic fatigue and fibromyalgia. And I have a whole handout here. I'm probably not going to go directly through it the way it's all written out, but we have a lot of good information in there. I want to leave this real open and casual. If you have any questions, make sure to let me know, and we can answer any of those questions, so that this can be more of an interactive experience, so you can get the most information that you need out of this. So when we talk about fibromyalgia and chronic fatigue, I'm sure if you're here, most of you, it's because for good reasons. So fibromyalgia and chronic fatigue, it's definitely an interesting area of medicine, because most of the time medical doctors just sort of give those diagnoses out because, well, I don't know what's wrong with them. So they're in pain, I can't figure it out, so they have fibromyalgia, or we don't know why they're tired, so they have chronic fatigue. And that's okay, but it doesn't really tell you why somebody has the problem. Although that's a big limitation in general with conventional medicine, because all they're concerned about is, let's find a diagnosis, and then, well, we look up what our drug is that we can prescribe for that diagnosis, and that's the treatment. So they don't really look to figure out what are the underlying problems that are causing this, and how can we help the body to heal. They're just really concerned about being able to give a drug to get rid of the symptoms so that you feel better. But you then have to keep taking that drug, and of course, a lot of times the drugs stop working. You have to find new drugs, and it just keeps going on and on. You don't really get to the root cause of the problem. So that's a big difference with naturopathic medicine, because we want to look at what are those underlying problems that are causing this, and working with the body to help your body to heal. And so fibromyalgia and chronic fatigue, you'll definitely hear them together, because most of the time people, with the group of symptoms, people fit into both categories. So I'm going to talk about, spend a lot of my time talking about them combined. We'll differentiate some of this, some of the basics, but overall, therapeutically, we work with a lot of the, we do a lot of the same things to help people to heal. So fibromyalgia, to really get a strict diagnosis of fibromyalgia, we have the little chart here. The person has all those little dots on it, and those are trigger points. And I know it's hard to see on there, but there are 18 of these trigger points on the body. And when we say trigger points, we're talking about points where you touch and ouch, it really hurts. It's real sore there. And so for a strict diagnosis of fibromyalgia, you're supposed to have at least 11 of those 18 trigger points on the body. And so, so that's where the true diagnosis of fibromyalgia happens. And it's typically much more women than men. 80 to 90% women versus a lot lower percentage, fairly much lower percentage of men, because it is overall in the population between 2 and 13% of the whole population. So you can see a majority of that would be women. And then, like I said, the diagnosis really doesn't give you, what's causing it. But there's a lot of medical conditions like that. Somebody has depression. Well, there are lots of different reasons why somebody could be depressed. And in order to treat it properly, you need to figure out what those different triggers are. Whether it's diet, whether it's emotional trauma, whether it's a physical chemical imbalance. There's a lot of different pieces of that. But it's important to get people healthy to understand what those pieces are and address them properly. And that's the same thing with fibromyalgia. You need to look at what those triggers are, and that's what we're going to talk about. So I have a list of the common symptoms associated with fibromyalgia. You can look at that. There's no sense in me reading off the list of them, where you can probably, a lot of it, say, yeah, I got this, I got that, I got this, I got that. But looking more at what kinds of health problems cause fibromyalgia. And when we talk about the chronic fatigue end of it, you're going to see things follow pretty closely. So when we talk about, we're talking about, I would say probably the biggest things that I tend to, see as the biggest issue. Definitely, I'd characterize both of these as an autoimmune disease, where the immune system is attacking the body for some reason. It's causing a response. But of course, that still doesn't tell you, well, why is your body overreacting? And so, some of the main things that I see with patients, one, I would say hormones can play a big role, especially with women, being that it's mostly a problem that happens with women, and women usually get diagnosed in their 40s and 50s when they're also making that change into menopause. Hormones definitely could be playing a role here. And so with that, the female hormones could be playing a role, but also other things like thyroid hormone, can play a big, part in this. And people that have an underactive thyroid for different reasons, and even sometimes your thyroid hormone levels can be normal, but your body's not utilizing it properly. Or they're not doing specific enough tests to really understand what's going on with your thyroid. And then also another thing, some other big pieces that I see when we talk about any type of autoimmune disease, whether it's fibromyalgia or chronic fatigue, or whether you're talking about things like lupus or Hashimoto's thyroiditis or any of these different autoimmune diseases, one of the biggest links tends to be your diet and digestion. And food allergies and sensitivities play a big role there. And so when we talk about the immune system, depending on the sources you look at, you can look, between 60 and 70% of your immune system is located in that digestive tract. And so if we're eating foods that are constantly triggering our immune system, to overreact, then that often causes these overreactions elsewhere in the body. And so I find that when I'm working with patients that I do focus a lot on diet, because I do see a lot of good improvements when people are making those diet changes. And then also, conventional medicine, a lot of times people, one of the main treatments is going to be an antidepressant. And with that, I mean, definitely there are imbalances in those different brain chemicals. So when you talk about the chemical imbalances, but typically the antidepressants, or a lot of these psych meds don't really address the problem properly. And so when I work with my patients, I like to do a type of testing that actually measures those different brain chemicals and nervous system chemicals to see which ones are really out of balance so that we can target those areas with natural therapies to help the body to heal. And I find that focusing on the nervous system on that end can be very powerful in helping to change this disease around and help people to start feeling better. Along with that, focusing on those neurotransmitters, I also focus real closely on a hormone called cortisol, which is a major role player in a lot of this too. And this stress hormone cortisol is a hormone that our bodies produce all the time, and it has a lot of important functions in the body. But it's something that when we're under stress, we produce way too much, and it'll change things like high cortisol levels at night can be a big problem with people's sleep. When we're talking about cortisol levels usually start highest first thing in the morning, and they taper off throughout the day to their lowest level, before bed. And so a lot of people, when they're under a lot of stress, the first thing that will happen with those cortisol levels is their nighttime levels will start to rise. And it might not necessarily affect your sleep yet, but everybody, especially parents, or when you're working, you notice that you might have dinner time, you might be a little tired, and then 7, 8, 9 o'clock, all of a sudden you get that second wind, and you feel good, and that's when you get a lot of things done. And then eventually that can work into, well, I just can't fall asleep too. And that can be, those cortisol levels being too high. There's other, some of these different brain chemicals, those neurotransmitters, can be part of that also and play part of that role. But I usually do testing with the two of those together to understand what's really going on there, because there's definitely a big link between fibromyalgia and sleep problems. It's one of those things that sometimes it seems like, well, which is first, the chicken or the egg? You're in pain and you can't get comfortable and you can't sleep. But when you can't sleep, your body can't, your muscles can't rest and restore and become, and healthily, do what they need to do to prepare for the next day. And so then you start, those muscles start hurting more and more. And you'll even notice, people that even don't have fibromyalgia will notice this. You have a really bad night. I have 2 young kids, so once in a while you have one of them that is up most of the night. You don't get much sleep. The next day, you're sore. You don't. Your body just feels sore. You're tired, and you can feel those changes on just a 1 or 2 nights, of being sleep deprived. For a major amount, but just a small amount of sleep deprivation chronically can start to work with a lot of these symptoms too. So it's definitely a piece that I always like to focus with patients is trying to make sure they're getting good sleep, because it's real important for the health of the body overall and to help you to repair. And even if it isn't necessarily the main trigger for, say, your fibromyalgia or your chronic fatigue, if you're sleeping better, you're going to have a better outlook on life. You're going to be able to follow, your program of what you're supposed to be doing better. You're going to have more energy to be able to exercise, to help your body to heal, and so everything starts to fall into place. So some of these other triggers, definitely they can be nutritional deficiencies, vitamin deficiencies, mineral deficiencies. But when we talk about that, a lot of conventional medicine will say, there's no reason to take vitamins because most people get enough of these vitamins and minerals in their foods to, for what they need. That's not really that's not really accurate. There are definitely different nutrients that we don't get in our foods the way we need to. Like one of the biggest ones I would say is magnesium. Magnesium is a mineral that really needs to be put into the soil for the plants to grow and have adequate levels of magnesium. And so the way conventional farming works, they just keep planting these crops over and over again. They put the right minerals in so that they'll grow up nice, but they don't necessarily put all the minerals in that are meant to help the plants be fully healthy, and especially to give us the nutrients we need. In fact, over the last 100 years, you look at different sources, and you usually see that 50 to 70% of the magnesium that was in our foods is we're about 50 to 70% less than we were, say, 100 years ago. So we're not getting anywhere near the amount of that mineral magnesium, which, when we're talking about fibromyalgia, can be really important for your muscles. And when you're lacking in magnesium, it can cause muscle aches, it can cause cramping and things. And so it's one of those things that we have to pay attention to. But along those same lines of nutritional deficiencies, sometimes it's not necessarily that you're not getting enough of some of these vitamins and minerals. It's that your body genetically, there's certain reactions working biochemically that your body just needs more than other people. I don't want to really go into too much detail here, but there's a lot of metabolic reactions in our bodies, that they require certain vitamins or minerals to make these things happen. And so sometimes we will have genetic deficiencies where a certain enzyme doesn't work properly. And so what that means is we have to give more of these certain vitamins and some of the building blocks to push those reactions through to make them happen. And then also we can have trouble converting certain vitamins into their active form. Like for instance, vitamin B6 is a very important vitamin for a lot of functions in our body. And most of our foods and vitamin supplements will have a form of vitamin B6. It's called pyridoxal hydrochloride. That's the main form of vitamin B6. But that's not the form of vitamin B6 that our bodies use. We have to convert that into a different vitamin called pyridoxal 5-phosphate. And so sometimes people can't convert that vitamin well into the active form, and so they'll get much bigger benefits by giving the active form, that pyridoxal 5-phosphate form of the vitamin, to actually help your bodies to utilize vitamin B6 and make things happen. And so, part of the point is that some people just need a lot more of certain vitamins to make things happen in your body, and you need special forms of some of these vitamins sometimes to make it happen also. And then we go through the rest of the list of common causes. Physical trauma. Definitely there can be a link there. Some people will get an injury, and that will be sort of the the hair that broke the camel's back. It's just enough to create things to happen. Let's see where else we missed on that edit. I think that's a lot of what we want to talk about, the fibromyalgia end of it. Any questions right now before we go on? Yes?
They diagnosed me with fibromyalgia, but I don't have any pain. I have the other symptoms, but I have no pain.
Right. So, so like I said, that's not necessarily, necessarily the best diagnosis for you then, because to be diagnosed with fibromyalgia, you really have to have the pain. That's the whole basis of the diagnosis.
But I have the other symptoms though.
Right. And so, so that's where you have this group of different symptoms, and they're all related in, this autoimmune manner, but, technically then you don't really have fibromyalgia. Not that makes a difference though.
Right, maybe the chronic fatigue more,
Well, either way, it doesn't really matter. It's about what are the underlying causes of your problems, and what do we need to do to help you to get better. When we talk about any type of autoimmune problem, there's a lot of leeway in between them. And, doctors try to diagnose, with, based on a specific symptom set, and there's certain blood tests that can lead you towards, getting a diagnosis for a certain autoimmune disease. But there's a lot of, overlap, and, some people have multiple symptoms of different pieces of autoimmune problems. And, since it's all the same underlying causes, it's just where your body is, most vulnerable and where it's attacking your body specifically. Yes?
So if you're deficient in some vitamin because you're not getting it through the nutrition you're eating, if you had regular blood work from your doctor and she's checking the levels of different things, would that show up in blood work, or even if she specifically said that? Because I know the vitamin D thing is always an issue with me. So the vitamin Ds or whatever, how magnesium shows up or whatever, would that show up in blood work?
Not necessarily. Magnesium, when we're talking about, when you take the typical blood magnesium levels, there's certain things in our blood that our bodies keep very closely in check in our blood. Things like magnesium and calcium and sodium and chloride, all those electrolytes are, and it doesn't really have any bearing on what the overall body level of those nutrients are, because we have to keep it in a very strict level in the blood so that, so that our bodies can live. So like say for instance calcium. Somebody can have, most people have perfectly normal calcium levels even if they have osteoporosis and have very weak bones. Because if you're not getting enough calcium, your body will just keep pulling it from the bones to keep it in the blood. And so that doesn't necessarily mean that you're getting enough calcium because your blood levels are normal. It just means that that your body isn't that, isn't really, hugely out of balance to where those calcium levels have started to fluctuate. Or there's hormones that regulate that too. So, so the blood levels, it's really hard to, with a lot of vitamins and minerals to properly test them, and that's where, a lot of that testing doesn't really happen because, just because the tests aren't that accurate enough.
But you're able to test or...
I looked into, we'll talk a little bit later about some of the testing I do, but some of it also just goes by symptoms too, and I like to look at different symptoms that are happening in people, look at correlations to different health problems that are known to happen from, say, a deficiency in magnesium, and trying to put some of these different pieces together that fit in your body. Any other questions right now? Okay, so let's talk about the chronic fatigue part. And so, in general, basically, people will get, the chronic fatigue diagnosis, if they've been tired for, more than 6 months. That's a very general diagnosis, and it doesn't have a lot of real strict criteria. Although, when you talk about chronic fatigue syndrome, it does, there are a lot of symptoms that tend to happen together. And I actually have, where it says frequency of CFS, chronic fatigue syndrome symptoms, I have a, percentage next to it of, these different symptoms. So, in order to have chronic fatigue syndrome, of course, you have to be tired. So, that says 100%. A lot of people have a low-grade fever, somewhere between 60 and 95%. Muscle pain, different studies show between 20 and 95%. And that's where, the fibromyalgia, they both come together real closely. Sleep disorders too, 15 to 90%. So there's a lot of variation in different studies, looking at this. But yet again, it comes down to a lot of the same different health issues, underlying health issues that are, contributing to these things. But with chronic fatigue syndrome, they've, with the research they've done with it, they're looking at a couple of different things than what necessarily we're focusing specifically on with fibromyalgia. Like for instance, infections, because a lot of people do tend to have a low-grade fever with chronic fatigue syndrome. You're looking at different types of infections. Over the years, one of the viruses that's been talked most about is Epstein-Barr virus. The only problem is, because when they test, people that have chronic fatigue, most people test positive for it. The problem is, 90 to 95% of adults will test positive for it, whether they have chronic fatigue or not. So most people have been exposed to this virus at some point in time. And unfortunately, when you're testing for viruses, we're testing to see that the immune system at one point in time has developed antibodies and has had a reaction to that virus. So it doesn't necessarily tell you have a current infection, it just says you've been exposed. And I have a list of other viruses that have been looked at. Everything from different types of herpes viruses to Lyme disease, Giardia, cytomegalovirus, Candida albicans. Candida is definitely, can be, for people that do have Candida, it can cause a lot of these different symptoms too. And so Candida albicans is a fungal infection. And so a lot of people, especially in our society now, where we're bombarded with lots of antibiotics to kill infections, and that's a whole other topic we could talk about as far as how antibiotics are overprescribed. But anyhow, when we get lots of antibiotics, they're supposed to kill bacteria, and so they along with killing whatever infection that the doctor is trying to kill with that antibiotic, it can also kill a lot of the good bacteria that's in the digestive tract. These probiotics you're starting to hear about. And so when you kill those good bacteria in the digestive tract, those bacteria tend to keep yeast under control and keep it in check. And so when you get rid of a lot of that bacteria, it allows for a lot more of that yeast to grow. And it doesn't necessarily mean you have to get like a vaginal yeast infection, or you talk about thrush with people where they're have a thick white furry coating on the tongue. It can be a lot of other. It doesn't necessarily have to have some of those classic symptoms to be an infection that's causing a lot of compromising the digestive tract and contributing to a lot of systemic symptoms. And so I guess right now I think I do want to talk a little bit more. I had started talking about that neurotransmitter testing. I just want to grab a test kit real quick. So I'm going to show you. So this Pharmacy and Labs is the lab that I usually like to use for this type of testing. They've been around for about 15 years now. I've been using them from probably at least 10 of those years. And so it's it's actually a saliva and urine test that send you home with. You do it over a day's time, and then you mail it directly back to the lab. And so saliva means you have to spit in these tubes, and you have to fill them up. And then you have a couple of urine tubes that get filled up too. You don't have to pee right in the tube. You get a little collection cup and a pipette. That'd be tricky, especially for women. But this is this is just one of the types of testing that I'll do, and we'll mail it back to the lab to get an idea. Like I said, those different brain chemicals, the neurotransmitters, along with that stress hormone cortisol. But sometimes we'll also look at different other hormones, some of the female hormones, the estrogens and progesterones, and also testosterone and things, to get a better idea of what's happening on a tissue level. So as far as the different neurotransmitters, I have a list of these different neurotransmitter imbalances. So serotonin you've probably heard of. It's one of the main antidepressant chemicals, and also norepinephrine is another one of the main ones that gets targeted when we're talking about antidepressants. But then we have epinephrine, which is adrenaline. We have dopamine is another one that you've probably heard about at some point in time to differing levels, and not necessarily always accurately. They talk about dopamine, but also GABA, another one of the more calming ones. Yes.
How do you test for those?
That's this urine test.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Yes.
My doctor has prescribed gabapentin for me. Does that have any relation to that?
Gabapentin is similar to GABA in structure, but it doesn't function like GABA. So GABA is a specific chemical that binds to a certain receptor in the nervous system to calm you. And so drugs like Ativan or Valium or anything, they talk about benzodiazepines. Those target GABA. Gabapentin is a pain medication that is similar in structure to GABA, but it doesn't really have the same effects.
Because he told me it would help me sleep with my sleep disorder.
Yeah, typically, it's typically more thought of to help relax you, help with pain. And then I have a couple of other these chemicals listed that I find real helpful because you have a mix of these stimulating chemicals in the nervous system and calming chemicals. And so when we talk about those chemicals, it's sort of like when you're driving a car. You need to have your gas pedal, and you need to have your brake pedal in order for everything to function properly. You can't just slam on the gas and expect to get where you're supposed to get safely. And that's the same with our nervous system. So we have these chemicals, like the epinephrine, which is adrenaline, norepinephrine, dopamine, that are much more stimulating to our nervous system to help us to move our muscles and have energy and function and be motivated. But then we also need a combination of the more calming, relaxing chemicals too, the GABA and the serotonin. And sometimes that mix can be tricky because you need, typically you need a lot more of the stimulating chemicals during the day so that you can be active and do what you need to do. But some of those chemicals need to be a lot lower at night so that you can relax and sleep. And vice versa with the calming ones. But so you need a nice balance of those, day and night, and that's where I find it's real important to actually test those chemicals. As opposed to a lot of doctors just, well, let's give this antidepressant, we'll give this, drug and that, and they don't really test for them to see which ones your body, what areas your body really needs to focus on, because often it gets complex. You might need, you might have 3 or 4 of these different pathways that really need to be focused on together. Where a drug, a doctor will give, one antidepressant, it doesn't work, we'll go up on dosage. Okay, that's not working. Let's go to the next one and test a different pathway. And so where we might need multiple pathways together to really get optimal effects. Yes?
Now, if you come here and get that test,
Mhm.
do you have to be off your meds that you're taking,
No,
like Cymbalta and all that?
No. Basically, I don't recommend that. But what it does is say, you're taking your meds, and we do the testing. We get to see what the meds are missing. So then we can look at, well, how else can we tweak that nervous system so that we can get better benefits while you're still getting the benefits of the medications. Now sometimes that means that we can, eventually wean off some of the meds, but that's not necessarily our end game. It's, our end game is about getting us to feel good. And so, sometimes that's possible, sometimes it's not, but, like I said, as long as we're getting people to feel good and function and, and be productive, that's the main, purpose here. Yeah, and then, there's this whole other side of things, which was, really, best termed environmental illness. And that's with all the chemicals in our environments. Some people have a lot more trouble breaking these chemicals down and getting rid of them out of our bodies. And some of that can all is also causing say a lot of these estrogen sensitive breast cancers. There's a lot of chemicals that mimic estrogen in the body, and our bodies can't get rid of them. So it'll stimulate those estrogen receptors, and can increase your risk for breast cancer because of that. But there's a lot of chemicals that our bodies just can't process in other ways too. And I have a whole list of different things there. But what they're going to do is, that's going to wear you down, cause you to be more tired. A lot of, if you're, especially if you notice that you're sensitive to different things, perfumes or candle scents or, different things like that. That's usually a sign that, your body's overburdened with some of these chemicals, and we have to work on getting the liver to work properly so that you can get rid of those chemicals out of your system and feel better. So next I want to talk about mitochondria. So mitochondria are they're called organelles. They're in each of our cells. And these mitochondria are what they call, they're the powerhouses of our bodies. They help us to make energy. And so when I'm looking at, especially the chronic fatigue end, but also the fibromyalgia end of things, it can be real important to focus on nutrients that are needed for those mitochondria to work properly and make energy in our bodies. And so, so that's something that, find is really important. Like, for instance, coenzyme Q10. So some of you may have heard about, CoQ10 in relation to some of the statin drugs, the cholesterol medications. When we take those statin drugs, the enzyme that it works on, HMG-CoA reductase, this enzyme, will help us to make cholesterol, but it also helps us to make this coenzyme Q10, which is important for us to make energy. So when they put somebody on one of these cholesterol drugs, it'll lower the cholesterol, but for some people it means that you can't make enough of this CoQ10 also. And that's where a lot of the symptoms from these cholesterol medications come in. People will get muscle weakness and pain and joint pains, and that's because our bodies, your body can't make enough energy to support those muscles and keep them healthy. So you can liken that to with the fibromyalgia too, having the pain, and those muscle pains. Some of that can be because your body's just not able to make the energy properly to keep those muscles healthy. But with the coenzyme Q10, like I talked about with other nutrients, there's a couple of different forms, and there's the main form of coenzyme Q10, and then there's a different form called ubiquinol, which is a lot more expensive, but it's much stronger and works a lot more effectively in the body. And sometimes it's needed to give that, ubiquinol form, which is, for some people can be as much as 8 times as strong as the regular CoQ10 to actually have the proper effects in the body. And then when I, talk about the mitochondria, I also have a couple of other nutrients listed there. So we talked about magnesium. We talked about a little bit about some of the B vitamins. Those are all real important for helping the mitochondria to make energy. The amino acid L-carnitine is also important there too. And then another one that you probably never heard of that I wrote in this list called nicotinamide ribose. And this is that's not really the main nutrient that is in the mitochondria, but this is a new supplement that's just come out in the last 6 months or so that helps us to make a certain nutrient that makes energy called NAD. And works in those mitochondria. And so this is a nutrient that's a precursor to that NAD. And I've found it to, I'm starting to find with using with people that it's real helpful for us to sort of jumpstart our mitochondria and help us to make more energy. Whenever I hear about some of these new things, before I just start, giving it to patients, usually for me, when I'm looking at new supplements and evaluating them, I'll wait forever before, to get rid of all these new fads. People talk about the fads, and this is the new, the next new groundbreaking thing. I'll usually wait, because most of the time, within 6 months or a year, you never hear about it again. But this one intrigued me because of the company that was, that was starting to market it. Very good company, very science-based, and it was intriguing because I'm a runner. So as an athlete, I'm always looking for things that'll help give me an extra boost. And so I got a bottle of the supplement, just trying to see how it would work with with me in particular. and I actually took it, and within a half hour or so, I was actually, went out for a run. I was actually starting to feel a little bit better, and about a week after I took it, my typical runs are usually about 6 miles when I take a run, about 2 or 3 times a week. And after about a week of taking this, my 6 mile, which is a 10K, my time improved by about 10%. Which doesn't sound like a lot, 10%, but for somebody that's been running that same route for 4 or 5 years and stays pretty consistent, to drop 10%, my time by 10% was pretty huge, just for not making any other changes, just taking this one supplement. So I've also then started using it with a lot of patients, more for fatigue and for chronic fatigue and stuff. But I've started to see some good results with some of these patients. What else am I talking about here? So I'm going to actually move right directly to this summary, and then we'll open up to more questions. So when we're talking about both the chronic fatigue and the fibromyalgia, first things first, we have to figure out what those underlying problems are in the body and address those. So whether there's hormonal problems or neurotransmitter problems or allergies or different things, we need to focus on those and take care of them. Exercise, I know that's a dirty word a lot of times because you don't feel like it. You're tired, you ache, but all the research shows that you need to keep moving, and and it's we're not talking about going out and running a marathon right away. We're talking about doing what you can so that you don't overexhaust yourself, and you keep doing that. That amount of walking or whatever you like to do, and then after a few weeks, a month, you feel comfortable with that, you boost it up a little bit. You go a little bit longer, a little bit faster, and slowly build your endurance up so that it really can help you. And I have another term here I really didn't go over: targeted amino acid therapy, and that's amino acids are the building blocks for a lot of those different neurotransmitters that I've been talking a lot about. And so I'll use a lot of those amino acids to help build some of these different neurotransmitters. Like for instance, serotonin. The antidepressant drugs, when they help to boost serotonin, they actually don't help you to make more serotonin. What they do is they block the breakdown of serotonin in your body so that the nerves have more to use. Where when I'm working with patients on serotonin, I'm actually giving them precursors to help their body have more of the building blocks to make serotonin on its own. So one of those building blocks can be the amino acid L-tryptophan. We've heard of L-tryptophan being in turkey, what makes people sleepy after eating too much turkey, although they've pretty much bred that out of the turkeys, and it's not really quite as high levels as it used to be. Now more, people get tired of that at Thanksgiving after just gorging themselves and having way too many sweets, but you can't really blame it on the turkey as much. But that L-tryptophan helps you to make more serotonin. But there's also another amino acid called 5-hydroxytryptophan. The air just kicked back on, so or 5-HTP, and this 5-HTP is an immediate precursor to serotonin in the body. So when you give this in a supplement form, usually within about 15 minutes or so, you're already starting to build those serotonin levels, and so it can be real beneficial. And so I'll look at a lot of these different neurotransmitters. If we need to build those levels, we can give different amino acids that help to build those levels and support your body's production of it. And then I want to talk about diet. And one of the things that I do with my patients for diet, which on the surface is going to sound crazy, but I actually use a diet with my patients based on your blood type. I was exposed to this blood type diet about 15 years ago. I was halfway through medical school. I know I don't look like I've been, it's been 15 years, since I've been in medical school. Actually, it's been 13 years since I graduated. I just turned 40. But anyhow, so 15 years ago, I was exposed to this blood type diet. And My first impression was, sounded like somebody who just sort of created a diet book to sell, sell copies and make money. I didn't understand what your blood type in your blood had anything to do with the food you eat in your digestive tract. But at the time, I was in my mid-20s, about 25, and I was in medical school, and I was getting real fatigued myself. To the point where there were times, when I wasn't in class and wasn't studying, where I could hardly get off the couch. Sort of face down, practically comatose, trying to not really rest, sleeping, not really awake. I'm sure some of you can sort of relate to that. So anyhow, I went to my school's medical clinic and, to try to get some answers. And one of the doctors there, told me about this blood type diet and I needed to start working on it. Like I said, I thought it sounded sort of silly, but I respected this doctor and I was going to give this a try. And of course, just because I wanted to be scientific and sort of look at and evaluate that diet, I didn't do anything else they told me. I didn't take any of the supplements that probably could have helped me get better a lot quicker, but I just focused on the diet. And so for my blood type, I'm actually a blood type B, which is fairly rare, only about 11% of the population. Some of the main things I had to stay away from was wheat, corn, and chicken for my diet. And so I started making those changes, and I was noticing some improvements there. And then after about 2 months, my wife had a company picnic, and I decided I've been so good on my diet, I'm just going to go enjoy what I'm, enjoy whatever they had, and that was the wrong answer because the main food they had was subs from Subway, and so I tried to be, as best as I could, getting the healthiest options. So I got a turkey sub, so it wasn't chicken like I was supposed to stay away from it, the turkey, and I had it on a whole wheat bun. And I ate this sub, and within 15 minutes, I was actually so exhausted I could hardly keep my eyes open. I actually felt like I was drugged. And that was when I realized, okay, wheat is a big problem for me. But being in my mid-20s and not really wanting to do all these other things that this blood type diet said I was supposed to do, I just focused on the wheat, which helped. And especially anytime I had any wheat, I was exhausted for the next day or two. But it still wasn't getting better enough, so I started looking at some of the other foods in the diet. I'd get rid of them for about a month or so and then try to add them back in. So like for instance for me, when I got rid of corn and added back in, I didn't get that immediate drop in my energy, but I just noticed that over the next couple of days I just didn't have the same stamina. My just overall energy level was a lot lower. And I started playing with some of these other foods and figured out how they were working in my body and started to really think that maybe this blood type diet, there was some real, something really to it. And so I, started doing more research on it. And then I finally, finally found out sort of the link to why, the blood type in your blood could have anything to do with the food you eat in your digestive tract and where it connects to the immune system. So conventionally, doctors look at those blood type markers being little proteins on your blood cells that differentiate your blood from foreign blood. So if you were to get a blood transfusion of the wrong blood, your immune system would see those foreign blood type markers as foreign invaders and attack them just like it would a virus or bacteria. And of course, that can be dangerous. Well, our immune system in the digestive tract works essentially the same way. And so this means that we can eat certain foods that have proteins on them called lectins that actually look like the other blood types. So when you eat those foods, your immune system, which is just looking for foreign invaders, will misidentify those foods as foreign, causing immune reactions in the digestive tract, which then could work into problems elsewhere in the body. So I find it's just a nice genetic marker to understand the foods your body is most likely to do really well with, and which ones your body might have some real reactions to. And I don't necessarily consider this a perfect system. There is no perfect system when we talk about diet, but I find it's a nice framework to look at the foods that are most likely to cause problems. And if you get rid of those foods for about a month or so and try to add them back in one at a time, you'll find which foods are really your body's triggers and what they're doing to you. So that's one of the ways that I really, work with, with diet and with food sensitivities. Because yes?
Do you test the blood type here?
Yes, unless somebody has a donor card or they're really certain of their blood type. But yeah, it's a little finger prick for drops of blood we can know in a couple of minutes. But so you have the, so I would consider these reactions a food sensitivity. So, and you differentiate that from a food allergy. So say somebody has an allergy to peanuts or strawberries or something. It's a very strong, immediate reaction. They might get hives, they might go into anaphylactic shock, you have an asthma attack, something. It's a very strong immediate reaction where these food sensitivities aren't quite the same. Sometimes they can take, some time to, come on. They're not necessarily quite as strong of a reaction all the time, but they're reactions that tend to stay in the body a lot longer. When you eat a food that your body has a reaction to, we'll often notice that, it takes 2, 3, 4, sometimes even up to 5 days for that to work out of your system. So if you're eating those foods once or twice a week, you're pretty much always reacting to it 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So you can't tell on one day when you eat it and give it up a day and then you try it the next day, because you're still always reacting to it. So it really does take, removing it for about a month or so to really notice those improvements. So when I'm working with a patient, they come in with these symptoms, but also with any patient, with varying amounts of different health issues. I schedule an appointment. My first appointment is 90 minutes with a patient, so I can really spend a good amount of time to understand what's going on with your body. So of course I'll take a nice detailed history of the symptoms of what you're experiencing, and some of any kinds of triggers that you've noticed in the past, or different things that go along with that. We'll also talk about any of the medications you're on, any vitamins you're on, or all the things you've tried. We'll talk about your diet real specifically, and then after we get all of that information, I do a type of testing called electrodermal screening, and it's a machine that measures acupuncture points on your hand and foot that are related to the different organs of your body. So it makes a nice general just sort of screening through the body, through those acupuncture points to understand where we might have some imbalances and where we need to focus our therapy a lot better. So it's just one piece of the information, but it helps to give some good basic information. And then after all that testing, we might look at some other outside lab testing, like for instance, the neurotransmitter and adrenal testing, or we might look at some other hormone testing, or we might not need to do other testing at all. And, it's not necessarily, everybody's different. We figure out what we need to do to get you, where you need to go individually. And then by the end of that visit, we'll usually put together, we'll put together a good food plan, and we'll talk about, for some of these foods that your body, we need to look at getting rid of, well, what are some good substitutes? So we help make that a little easier so that we're not just pulling things out of your diet, we're giving you something in place so that we're not being deprived. And then along with that, we'll look at certain, nutrient supplements that may be appropriate. Now, sometimes if we have to do extra outside lab testing, we want to wait on some of those, looking at some of those supplements. So that just all depends on what we need to do with each particular person. So you go home with a sheet that lists out, the diet and any particular supplements and exactly how to take them too. And then after that initial visit, I usually will see somebody about once a month after that, especially at first. But those follow-up visits are about 45 minutes. So we still get plenty of time to sort of go over everything, but answer other questions, make any tweaks to the diet and the supplements or things that we need to do. And unfortunately, you probably already figured out because naturopathic doctors aren't licensed here in the state of Ohio. Unfortunately, insurance doesn't cover us here. There, in the 18 states where we're licensed, I think there are 4 states that mandate insurance reimbursement the same as medical doctors. The other states that are licensed, it's sort of, it just depends on the insurance carrier and the policy. But so with that, being that it is an out-of-pocket expense, I do try to make it as reasonable as possible for people. So my initial consultation, I charge $195 and for that 90 minutes. Of course, that's a lot of money, and I understand that. But when you talk about a medical doctor spending 5 minutes with you, not really getting the information, it's sometimes it's better to pay a little extra and find figure out better what's going on. Because let's be honest, the medical doctors, when you have your copay and they're seeing 10 patients an hour, they're making 10 times what I'm making. But so when we to give you a little bit of break and to help make sure that, you know, somebody sticks to that first appointment, we do offer a way to put down a $50 deposit on that visit. And if you put that down, that deposit when you schedule, then we'll give you a $25 discount for the overall visit. So that brings down the total price to $170. So when you come in for the visit, it means you actually pay $120 for the rest of that visit after the first 50. Yes.
Does that fee include testing? Or is-
That includes that basic electrodermal testing. If we have to do other outside lab testing, that's typically, you know, that's not covered. Sometimes your insurance might cover it, sometimes it might not. Although, of course, that's sometimes the same case with medical doctors and their testing too. And that's why I try not to do any more outside lab testing than I have to, because I don't want to burden you with extra expenses that maybe we don't need. If we can figure a way out to get the information without doing extra testing, we're going to do that. Yes.
Have you had any experience with anyone that stopped eating wheat voluntarily and went downhill from there?
Just wheat by itself?
Well, gluten total.
Total gluten. I haven't. Now, are you talking about from experience?
Yes.
Okay. Do you care to elaborate in front of the group, or you?
I'll elaborate.
Yeah.
I decided to quit eating wheat because of the aches and pains that I already had.
Yeah.
And within 3 days, things were going downhill fast.
Yeah.
Muscle aches and pains, joint, my neck, everything.
Yeah.
And I stuck with it for 28 days.
Okay.
And by that point in time, I could get my butt into the seat of the car, but I could not bring my left leg into the car.
Yeah. Now, what were you replacing the wheat for?
Well, I would eat things that weren't gluten-free.
Yeah. And so that's where, you know, a lot of things that are gluten-free, a lot of those gluten-free products, they have lots of other ingredients. And
Well,
so, like, for instance, corn is a big, you know, piece of that.
Yeah, I ate a lot of corn.
Uh-huh.
I always have eaten a lot of corn, though. It didn't change. When I decided after 28 days that, no, this isn't working for me, I went and had a pasta dinner with good Italian bread, and I saw an immediate improvement. But I'm still not back to where I was before I started the gluten-free.
Yeah. Yeah, so, you know, there's a lot of other things that are going on there, whether it's, some nutrient deficiencies or, things that happened because you went off the wheat. If it was some of the ingredients that were in some of those gluten-free products that caused some reactions in your body or something. Yes.
I've had that gluten intolerance for several years. It came after a multiple birth pregnancy. And somebody once told me that some of those gluten-free foods, they lack the essential B vitamins. Is that true?
Well, white flour too. I mean, a lot of wheat products will too. But so this it's a lot more complex than you gave up the gluten and the gluten was keeping you feel better. It was probably more had to do with other things that you were adding in, or just changing the balance of the nutrients in your body.